When one woman tried to take over a mountain lodge gate in the name of HOA regulations, she didn't expect electric shocks, viral humiliation, or a goose named Gary. This isn't just a feud, it's a full-blown war of wit, wire, and wild retaliation. Buckle up, because things get shocking. Let's begin story. Point 1. The spark that set everything off. It began with a piercing scream that ricocheted through the pine-covered hills of Silverpine Ridge, a small mountain community nestled in the Rockies. The birds scattered from the treetops. A snowplow driver slammed on the brakes 2 blocks away. Even the creek that ran behind the home seemed to hush. The source? HOA Karen, of course. The Silverpine Ridge Property Association's self-appointed compliance officer was lying flat on her back in the snow, steam rising from the charred sleeve of her neon orange windbreaker. Her designer snow goggles lay cracked a few feet away, and the clipboard she always wielded like a royal decree fluttered helplessly in the breeze. What happened? She had touched the gate. The gate wasn't just a gate anymore. It was the boundary to Timberfall Lodge, a century-old family retreat owned by the reclusive but sharp-witted Eleanor Whitmore, a retired military engineer who had come to the mountains for peace and solitude. What Karen didn't know when she strutted up to that timbered entryway and grabbed the antique iron latch was that Eleanor had spent the entire night rigging it with a new electrified defense grid, salvaged from an old cattle containment system and powered by a solar-charged battery box tucked beneath the snow. Karen, as always, had declared the gate a community liability, claiming its visibility from the nearby hiking trail meant it violated aesthetic cohesion standards set by the HOA. Never mind that the trail was built 5 years ago and Eleanor's family had built Timberfall Lodge in 1912. Earlier that morning, Eleanor had discovered her brass key missing, the one that locked the iron gate to the path leading up to the lodge. Then she noticed the padlock was gone, and footprints in the snow led away from the now wide-open entrance. When 2 of her huskies returned from their morning roam carrying pieces of laminated HOA flyers in their mouths, she knew something was off. But she hadn't expected theft. Not until her neighbor Jasper, an easygoing retired ranger, showed up on her porch with a cup of hot cider and his phone. "You're gonna want to see this," he said, handing it over. The video was crystal clear. There was Karen, trudging through the snow in her fox fur boots, platinum hair glinting in the sun. She looked around dramatically, muttering about code infractions, then pulled Eleanor's missing key from her pocket and popped the gate open. "She broke in," Eleanor muttered. "Oh, it gets better," Jasper said. Seconds later in the footage, Karen waved the camera off like it was paparazzi and strutted down the lane as if she owned the property. That was when Eleanor had made a decision. She spent the night working in her garage workshop under a heat lamp, muttering equations and soldering wire ends with a surgeon's precision. Her dogs watched from their mats as she adjusted voltage levels and affixed pressure sensors to the gate frame. When she hung the "Do Not Interprovate Sanctuary" sign, it was less warning and more prophecy. And now here Karen lay electrified, humiliated, and partially embedded in a snowbank. Eleanor, standing on her porch wrapped in a wool shawl, watched the scene unfold with measured calm. She took a sip of her black tea and murmured under her breath, "Shouldn't have taken my key, Karen." And that was the momentary shock that would ignite an all-out neighborhood war. Point 2. Fallout and fury in the mountains. By midday, Silverpine Ridge was buzzing like a beehive kicked into overdrive. Word of Karen's electrocution spread faster than wildfire. Her scream, it turned out, had been caught not only on Jasper's phone, but also on 3 different Ring cameras and a GoPro strapped to a kid's sled. Before lunch, a heavily filtered post had already gone live in the Silverpine Ridge HOA Facebook group, featuring a close-up of Karen's mildly singed sleeve and the caption, "Attacked by a dangerous trap, HOA safety violation." The comments section lit up with predictable fury. Some rallied to her cause with cries of illegal wiring and reckless endangerment. Others, however, began asking harder questions. "Wait, why were you touching her gate? Isn't Timberfall Lodge private property? Didn't she steal the key?" Karen ignored them all. Instead, she doubled down, calling for an emergency HOA meeting that evening at the community lodge. She arrived wrapped in an emergency foil blanket like a soldier returning from war, flanked by 2 younger HOA sycophants, Dale, the kind who believed laminated ID tags were a personality, and Melinda, who carried a manila folder labeled evidence like she was a character from Law and Order. Across the room, Eleanor sat silently, Dressed in a dark green fleece and sipping from a thermos, she didn't speak. She didn't need to. Karen took center stage like a pageant queen on a vengeance crusade. She recounted the assault, exaggerating every detail of high-voltage surge, her unconsciousness a lie, and how the trauma caused her to drop her peppermint latte in the snow. She even produced what she claimed was a doctor's note from an urgent wellness clinic, which looked suspiciously like it had been printed on her home printer with Comic Sans font. She booby-trapped her gate, Karen shrieked. This is an act of aggression. What if a child had touched it? What if someone important like a board member had been hurt? Eleanor raised one eyebrow and finally spoke, her voice smooth as glass slicing through cold air. Are you admitting you trespassed on my land and stole a key to enter without permission? That froze the room. A long silence fell as board members exchanged glances. Even Melinda lowered her evidence folder. Karen's face twitched. It was a community oversight inspection, she said quickly. The gate was visible from the public trail, therefore subject to HOA review under Bylaw 128. Eleanor calmly produced a laminated copy of her land deed, a survey map, and a preservation certificate that stated the lodge had been exempt from any jurisdictional interference since 1995. The whole board reviewed it in stunned silence. But Karen wasn't done. When Eleanor returned home that night, she found the words illegal gate spray painted in red across her snow-covered driveway. A pair of her motion lights had been smashed, and a tire track veered dangerously close to her fence post. She didn't call the police, not yet. Instead, she returned to her garage. She turned up the heat lamp, and she got to work. Point 3. The Rise of the Fortress. The next morning, a thin layer of frost coated the mountaintop, casting everything in silver. But Timberfall Lodge stood different, changed, transformed. Eleanor had worked through the night like a woman possessed. She wasn't just protecting her land, no, she was making a statement. The gate had been cleaned of Karen's red vandalism by dawn, and its place stood a reforged iron arch, the kind you'd expect to see outside an old European castle. And beneath it, affixed with brass bolts to either side of the wooden post, gleamed new motion sensors, freshly wired and blinking with a faint red pulse. They tracked movement, measured proximity, adjusted amperage. And then there was the sign. Private property. Do not enter. Trespassers will be educated. Electricity is included. People came to see it. Neighbors driving by slowed their SUVs. A few took selfies. One child yelled from the back seat, "Is this the Zap Gate?" The story had spread, evolving into a local myth. Electric Widow of Timberfall. Some were calling Eleanor now. But not everyone found it funny. By 9:00 a.m., Karen returned. This time she brought reinforcement men in navy windbreakers with shiny ID tags clipped to their jackets and walkie-talkies clipped to their belts. One introduced himself as a freelance property safety consultant. The other said nothing, just scribbled in a small black notebook like an off-brand FBI agent. Karen stood in front of the gate, triumphant and smug, holding a thick stack of papers. "This is an official HOA order of compliance," she announced, waving the pages like sacred scripture. "You are in violation of Articles 5C through 8B regarding unauthorized fencing, hazardous decorative elements, and tone clashes with approved mountain rustic color palettes." Eleanor didn't even blink. She stepped down from the porch, boots crunching through the snow, her wool coat flaring like a cape. She stopped 2 feet from Karen and glanced at the papers. "This is a menu," she said coolly, "from the Silverpine Pumpkin Festival. It's dated 2018. You've got a cider price list in here." Karen snatched the bundle back, face flushing crimson. One of the inspectors stepped forward. "We're going to need to assess the gate for potential safety concerns." He reached toward the latch. There was a faint HOA warning vibration just beneath the threshold. Eleanor didn't stop him. He touched it. Crack! A low, sharp snap of energy burst from the latch, not enough to injure but more than enough to earn a yelp. The man reeled back, clutching his hand, shouting, "It's live!" Karen screeched. She assaulted him with electricity. Eleanor crossed her arms. "No." He touched the gate clearly marked with 6 warning signs. "Would you like a flashlight to see them better?" The second inspector looked at Karen. "I thought you said this was just decorative." Karen stomped her boot, furious. "This is war, Eleanor. This is war." Eleanor stared at her in silence, the cold wind lifting a strand of her silver streaked hair. "Then choose your battlefield wisely," she said. As the inspectors retreated down the drive, one cradling his burnt hand, Gary the Goose waddled from behind the tool shed, honking in outrage like a soldier late to the skirmish. Eleanor looked down at him. "You'll get your turn." Point 4. The Meme Wars and Blue Dye Ambush. Karen had made a critical mistake. She underestimated how fast a mountain town could weaponize the internet. By the time she returned home from her electrified embarrassment with her Singe Inspector crew, the HOA Facebook group had already exploded. Someone had posted the porch camera footage at the moment her hired help touched the gate, yelped like a startled poodle, and dove face first into a snowbank. It was edited with slow motion, dramatic music, and sound effects. The caption: HOA Karen and the Temple of Zap. The comments were merciless. "Is the electricity aesthetic compliant, Karen? That gate has more backbone than the entire HOA. My toddler knows not to touch things with warning signs." Eleanor didn't comment once. She simply watched the storm build while sipping her peppermint tea. But Karen wasn't content to be a laughingstock. No, she pivoted to full-blown PR mode. The next morning, a new post appeared on the HOA page, a photo of Karen's elbow, now bandaged in gauze that looked like it belonged in a Victorian soap opera. The caption read, "I risked my safety for this community. This could happen to anyone." She claimed the gate had delivered a near-lethal jolt, described Eleanor as an isolated extremist, and referred to Timberfall Lodge as a rogue structure with unapproved defensive mechanisms. She even suggested suing Eleanor under neighborhood hazard statutes. But the backlash came quick. People began replying with gifs of tasers, lightning bolts, and an increasing number of Goose Gary memes with captions like, "Security is honked," "Electrified," and "Goose certified." Karen's kryptonite, 1 voltage to birds. Still, Karen pushed forward. She crafted a glossy HOA flyer community safety alert and dropped copies in mailboxes throughout the neighborhood. That evening, as snow began to fall, she made one last desperate attempt to reclaim control by sabotage. Clad in a long gray hoodie and yellow rubber gloves, Karen returned to Timberfall's gate. This time she was stealthy, or at least she tried to be. Eleanor had expected her. While Karen crouched low, reaching for the latch with what appeared to be insulated tongs. A small pressure sensor embedded in the gravel triggered Eleanor's latest addition, a modified livestock dye sprayer mounted to the top post. Whoosh! A jet of vivid blue dye exploded over Karen's shoulders, drenching her hoodie, flattering her hair, and soaking her arms. She screamed so loud it echoed through the trees, waking the dogs and making two deer sprint across the ridge. The dye was non-toxic and temporary but very difficult to remove. She bolted, slipping in the snow, trailing blue footprints behind her like a cartoon criminal. She didn't even try to fight the gate this time. She just ran, blue, dripping, and howling. The next morning, the town woke to yet another video. This one from Eleanor's thermal imaging camera, capturing Karen's panicked escape in high contrast, complete with a goose honking in the background and slow jazz playing over the footage. Caption: "Blue is the coldest color." Karen didn't post for 2 days after that. And in Silverpine Ridge, that kind of silence meant only one thing: she was planning something worse. Point 5. Courtroom drama and the return of the key. 2 days of silence was more than the mountain had heard from Karen in years. And then, just like thunder rolling in after a flash struck again, it arrived in the mail, delivered with an unnecessary thud, a certified letter addressed not to Eleanor, but to her niece, Sadie Whitmore, the youngest of the Whitmore clan and an official tech-savvy documentarian of the feud. The envelope gleamed with embossed gold lettering and came from an office called Lex and Legend Civil Defense Group. The letter accused the family of slander, emotional damage, property-related trauma, and unforgettably malicious deployment of avian intimidation tactics. Karen had apparently hired a lawyer, or at least someone willing to pretend to be one, for a $200 retainer and a box of lemon squares. That night, the family gathered around the fireplace in Timberfall's great room. The dogs snored at their feet. The geese were outside, silent sentries in the snow. Eleanor read the letter out loud, deadpan, until she hit the phrase intentional poultry-based harassment. There was a long pause. Then laughter erupted. Uncle Ron suggested framing the letter. Sadie wanted to upload it to the HOA Facebook group with the caption "Karen's Goose Manifesto," but Eleanor only sipped her cocoa and said, "Let her try. Just make sure we're ready when she does." And they were. Sadie had spent the past week compiling a war chest of documentation, county land records, deeds, historic site permits, an actual letter from the State Office of Historic Properties confirming that Timberfall was a heritage-protected homestead not subject to exterior regulatory encroachment. She labeled the folder, "Irrefutable Evidence." The next week, Karen filed in small claims court, marching in like a peacock with legal briefs flapping in her hands. She wore a navy blue suit and a comically oversized hat that did nothing to hide the lingering hints of blue dye in her hairline. Her case: she wanted $5,000 for trauma, dry skin from the dye, and loss of social standing. Eleanor arrived holding nothing but a manila envelope and a jar of Lisa's jam. Sadie's mom, the family's kitchen queen, when the judge asked for her statement, she calmly laid out photos of the gate's warning signs, documentation of each trespassing incident, video stills of Karen entering the property uninvited, veterinary reports confirming the dye was livestock grade and non-toxic. As a final flourish, Eleanor produced the blue-stained glove Karen had dropped the night of the ambush, sealed in a Ziploc bag like forensic evidence. Karen sputtered, "That could belong to anyone." The judge raised an eyebrow. "Does anyone else in this town wear size XS with Karen written in Sharpie on the inside cuff?" Case dismissed. The judge even added dryly, "And I recommend the plaintiff avoid that gate or poultry." Outside the courtroom, people were waiting not for Karen, but for Grandma Zapp, as Eleanor hadn't officially been nicknamed. A local news crew captured Eleanor placing the stolen farm key returned by court order back on the nail inside her workshop. It clicked softly into place. The sound of victory. Point 6. The final break-in and the Goose offensive. Karen disappeared after the courtroom defeat. The HOA suspended her community enforcement privileges, which had never existed in the first place, and even rewrote several bylaws to clarify that trespassing was still illegal, even if you had a clipboard. For 3 whole weeks, it was quiet. Too quiet. Eleanor, ever the soldier, didn't trust the silence. "This is the kind of quiet you get before an avalanche," she muttered, walking the perimeter every evening with a flashlight and her voltage meter. Then it happened. 3:13 a.m. Motion detectors lit up on the south field. The infrared feed on the porch monitor flared red. Karen was back. But this time, she wasn't marching with clipboards or shouting about bylaws. Not this time. She was crawling. In full camouflage gear, face smudged with grease paint, she slithered through the snow like a low-budget spy. A shovel was strapped to her back, a roll of chain dangling from one hip, and a laminated HOA ID tucked into her ski jacket like a holy relic. Her plan was absurd. She was trying to dig under the electrified fence, loop in her own lock, and declare that as an act of adverse possession, the gate now belonged to the HOA. She'd read about the concept online, half understood it, and decided that if she just touched the gate from the inside, she'd win. What she didn't know was that Eleanor had anticipated this exact insanity. At about 1 foot underground, Karen hit a hidden web of copper mesh, interlaced with rusted metal shrapnel and coated in fermented castor oil gel, a deterrent Eleanor designed to ward off wild pigs, trespassers, and now, delusional HOA crusaders. The stench was instant and horrific, like wet onions stuffed in a gym bag left in a volcano. Karen gagged violently. She tried to back out, slipped on the frozen edge of the hall, and landed face first in a thicket of thorny vines Eleanor had transplanted from the old blackberry patch. Then came the worst part. As Karen staggered to her feet, reeking and muttering, she reached for the gatepost to pull herself up. But the moment her hand touched the top rail, a dye spray nozzle triggered, unleashing a stream of bright indigo livestock marking dye directly into her face. The blue liquid coated her parka, seeped into her boots, and dyed her platinum hair a violent shade of teal. She let out a shriek loud enough to wake half of Silverpine Ridge. And that's when Gary the Goose struck. He had been waiting, perched silently on the roof of the woodshed, his eyes glowing with avian vengeance. The moment Karen screamed, Gary launched himself from the eaves with a hiss that could strip paint. He hit her at full waddle, wings flapping, beak snapping. Karen fled across the snowy field, tripping over her own shovel, tangled in chain, her shrieks accompanied by Gary's triumphant honking and the distant click of Eleanor's porch camera logging it all. She ran all the way to the road, where her nephew was waiting in a car that peeled out the moment she dove into the passenger seat, blue, furious, and covered in feathers. By sunrise, the security footage was already online. Sadie had titled the video, Operation Smurfstorm the Final Flail, and Silverpine Ridge howled with laughter. Point 7 Victory, Vindication, and Voltage Ever After. The aftermath of Karen's failed invasion came not with sirens or shouting, but with the gentle clink of mugs and the low hum of an electric fence running smooth and steady across frost-kissed earth. Within hours of the video titled Operation Smurfstorm hitting the town's unofficial group chat, it had gone viral not just in Silverpine Ridge, but well beyond. Even Channel 7 News did a segment, calling it The Mountain Standoff, How One Woman, One Gate, and One Goose Changed a Neighborhood. Eleanor declined interviews, but she allowed the cameras to roll as she replaced the final lock on the gate and gently hammered in a new plaque, gifted by the local hardware store. Private property, trespassers will be mildly educated, briefly died, and possibly chased by a goose. Karen, on the other hand, vanished behind closed blinds. For weeks, no one saw her. Rumors swirled. Some said she was hiding out in a spa, trying to bleach the dyed skin still visible on her arms. Others claimed she tried to submit a civil complaint to the mayor's office, only to be laughed out of the lobby when she referred to Gary as a domesticated projectile. The truth was quieter. Karen's authority within the HOA crumbled. At the next board meeting, the room was full, not with her supporters, but with residents holding printouts of land deeds, citing privacy rights, and passing around copies of Eleanor's preservation certificate like Holy Scripture. A motion was raised, then seconded. Karen was removed from the HOA Enforcement Committee. Her clipboard was taken, her Facebook admin status was revoked. A new clause was added to the bylaws. No HOA member may assert jurisdiction over properties beyond the officially designated boundary line, regardless of trail visibility, gate style, or personal grievances. The war was over, and the farm Timberfall Lodge, the last bastion of quiet independence in a town overtaken by overreach, stood tall and untouchable. A week later, Eleanor hosted a modest gathering, just neighbors, family, and the few locals who had stood by her. She grilled bison burgers, poured hot cider, and handed out jars of Lisa's jam, now branded with limited edition labels reading, Blueberry Justice. Gary strutted around like a war hero, honking at chipmunks and accepting crusts of Sordo-like nettles. Eleanor sat on the porch next to Sadie, watching the sky bleed orange as the sun dipped behind the treetops. She didn't speak much, just observed the now peaceful gate with a look of quiet pride. Sadie glanced at the perimeter monitor. You think she's really done? Eleanor snorted softly. Karen, she'll find something else to scream about. Maybe someone's chimney isn't smoke compliant. She leaned back, hands behind her head. But this land, this gate, they're ours. Always have been. From across the field came the distant sound of a child pointing and whispering, That's the gate that zapped the Lady Blue. And Eleanor smiled. She hadn't just protected her home. She'd drawn a line in the snow and said, no further. She'd built a fortress not of stone or wood but of truth, stubbornness, voltage, and one very angry goose. And in the mountains, that kind of stand wasn't just survival. It was legend. Valuable lesson. Stand your ground but do it with intelligence, integrity, and a touch of creativity. The feud between Eleanor and whole Karen is more than just a comedic clash of personalities. It's a powerful reminder of the importance of knowing your rights, protecting what's yours, and refusing to be bullied by authority misused. Eleanor didn't win by yelling louder or sinking to petty tactics. She won by staying calm, documenting everything, using her skills wisely, and building a defense both legal and literal that couldn't be ignored. She didn't just react emotionally, she acted strategically. That's what made her unstoppable. And just as importantly, her victory wasn't built on vengeance, it was built on principle. So whether you're defending your land, your voice, or your values, remember this. When challenged, be like Eleanor's rehearsal, respectful and resolute. And if necessary, bring a goose.